You convinced him to change his will. My dad told everyone when Grandpa left me his assets. The next day, my sister exposed another betrayal. Now I walk away forever. I'm 32 years old. Growing up, I was always the one who tried to keep things together in my family, even when it felt like things were falling apart. I guess it's because I was raised to believe that family was everything, that no matter what, you have each other's back. That was before my grandfather passed away. Grandpa and I were close, closer than anyone really understood. From when I was just a kid, he'd take me fishing on Sunday mornings, just the two of us. While everyone else was getting ready for church, we'd be out on the lake, watching the sunrise, talking about life. My parents never quite understood our connection, probably because they were too busy with work and social obligations to spend much time with him themselves. As I got older, our relationship only deepened. I'd drive over to his house after work, sometimes bringing takeout, other times just sitting with him on his porch, listening to his stories. He'd tell me about his struggles when he was younger, how he had to fight tooth and nail for everything. About the 3 jobs he worked simultaneously to put my father through college. About the small real estate investments he made that eventually paid off. He didn't have a formal education, but he was street smart in ways my parents never appreciated. I think he saw something of himself in me, a certain resilience maybe, a willingness to work hard without complaining. While my parents focused on appearances and status in their suburban community, I was more interested in substance, in building something meaningful even if it wasn't flashy. Grandpa noticed that. That's why when he died after a brief but intense battle with cancer, he left me most of his estate. The sum wasn't huge by today's standards, about $280,000, but it was enough to cause a lot of tension. Enough to buy a modest home outright in our area or start a small business. Enough to change someone's life trajectory. The reading of the will was a somber affair that quickly turned ugly. My father's face turned a deep shade of red, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. My mother gasped audibly, her hand clutching her necklace. My sister Hannah just looked confused, her eyes darting between me and our parents. "There must be some mistake," my father said, his voice strained with barely controlled anger. "My father wouldn't do this." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked at my father with the patient expression of someone who'd seen this scenario play out many times before. "I assure you, your father was of sound mind when he made these decisions. We discussed his wishes at length, and he was quite clear about his intentions." That was the beginning of the end for my relationship with my parents. I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision, but somehow they turned their anger on me. They couldn't understand why Grandpa would leave me everything. They believed they were entitled to it, and the moment they found out, everything changed. Within days, the whispers started. At first, they were just insinuations made during family phone calls. Relatives would call me, their voices tinged with a strange mixture of congratulations and suspicion. It took weeks before I learned the full extent of what my parents were saying behind my back. My childhood friend, whose mother was in the same gardening club as my mother, finally told me over beers one night. "Look, man, I don't know how to say this," he began, fidgeting with his bottle label. "But your mom's been telling people that you manipulated your grandfather, that you isolated him from the family in his last months and convinced him to change his will." I nearly choked on my drink. "What? That's insane. You know that's not true." He just nodded quickly. "Of course I know. I've known you since we were 10. But she's telling everyone who'll listen that you took advantage of an old man with dementia." "Grandpa didn't have dementia," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "He was sharp as a tack until the cancer medications made him drowsy in those last few weeks." But the damage was already done. The warm family dinners, the birthday celebrations, they all turned cold. My father started calling me selfish to my face and much worse behind my back, from what I heard. My mother wouldn't even make eye contact with me at family gatherings, acting as though I'd committed some terrible betrayal. I tried to use some of the money in ways that would help my family, hoping it might ease the tension. I offered to help my parents with some home repairs they'd been putting off. My father refused outright, saying he didn't want stolen money. I suggested setting up a college fund for my sister's future kids. My mother acted as though I'd suggested something obscene. Hannah was the only one who hadn't changed. At least that's what I thought. I'd always thought of her as the one person in the family who truly understood me. She and I had always been close growing up. Sure, she was younger by 4 years, but we shared a bond. We'd protected each other during our parents' frequent arguments, built blanket forts in the living room, shared secrets and dreams. After everything that happened with the inheritance, I thought she'd be the one to stick by me. And superficially, she did. She still answered my texts, still met me for coffee occasionally. But there was a new distance between us, a cautiousness in how she spoke to me, as if she wasn't sure which version of me she was talking to, her brother, or the manipulative person our parents described. When Hannah finished college and struggled to find work that would cover her rent in the city, I stepped in to help. I didn't make a big deal of it. I just quietly transferred money to her account each month to cover the difference between what she could afford and what she owed. I didn't tell our parents, and neither did she. It was our secret, a way for me to use Grandpa's money to help my family, just as I knew he would have wanted. For 2 years, this arrangement continued, even as the family rift deepened. My parents stopped inviting me to holiday gatherings altogether. Family weddings became exercises in awkward avoidance. At my cousin's baby shower, my mother actually turned and walked in the opposite direction when she saw me enter the room. The truth was, I didn't know how much things had really changed until that day, the day of my father's birthday. He was turning 60, a milestone I couldn't ignore despite our strained relationship. I had bought a bottle of his favorite whiskey and a box of cigars. I wasn't expecting hugs or a warm welcome, but I figured I could at least show up and offer a peace offering. Maybe I could be a bigger person, right? I drove to my childhood home with a knot in my stomach, rehearsing what I might say. When I arrived at the house, Hannah answered the door. She looked surprised, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of me standing on the porch, gifts in hand. But she didn't seem angry, which I took as a positive sign. "Jeffrey," she said, raising an eyebrow, "I didn't expect you to show up." "Yeah, I figured I'd make the effort," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered in my chest. "Thought I'd come for Dad's birthday." For a moment she hesitated, glancing back over her shoulder toward the living room where I could hear voices and soft music. I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing the potential drama of my presence against the awkwardness of turning me away. But then she shrugged. "Well, come on in then." Everything felt normal for a few minutes as I stood awkwardly in the entryway. Hannah offered to take my coat, made some small talk about the weather. I could hear laughter from the living room, the clink of glasses. Then I heard my mother's voice, clear and carrying. "Who was at the door, Hannah?" Hannah and I exchanged a look. "It's Jeffrey," she called back. The laughter stopped, the voices quieted, and then I saw my parents emerge from the living room, their faces transforming as they registered my presence. My father's expression hardened into a mask of disapproval, his gray eyebrows drawing together. My mother's face fell, her practiced social smile vanishing in an instant. "Why are you here?" my father muttered, his tone cold, devoid of the warmth a father should have for his son. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the hostility. "I came to wish you a happy birthday. I brought gifts." I held out the whiskey and cigars like a peace offering, hopping against hope that they might be accepted. He scoffed, not even looking at what I'd brought. "We didn't invite you." And that was it. The coldness I'd felt from them for months was now in full display, naked and unashamed. I tried to stay calm, to not let his rejection sting as much as it did. "Look, I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to show up, make things right." But my mother interrupted, stepping forward with her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Why are you even here, Jeffrey? You always bring trouble. Just leave." Their words hit harder than I expected, like physical blows. I didn't know how to react. It felt like I was being pushed out of my own family, exiled for a crime I hadn't committed. I looked around the room. Other relatives were sitting in awkward silence, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. I noticed my aunt, who had always been kind to me, looking down at her hands. My uncle, who had taught me to drive, suddenly became very interested in his drink. No one was willing to stand up for me, to question the narrative my parents had created. Something inside me snapped then. All those months of accusations and whispers, of trying to understand why my own parents had turned against me, of maintaining dignity and restraint. It all came to a head in that moment of public rejection. "Celebrate?" my dad scoffed, gesturing vaguely toward the assembled family members. "You're nothing but a loser. You think a few gifts will make up for everything." That was the breaking point. All those years of trying to fit in, to make peace, to be the good son, it all came rushing back in that moment, alongside the fresh wound of his words. A calm clarity settled over me, a realization that no matter what I did, they had chosen their story about me, and nothing would change it. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking not with fear, but with a cold anger I'd never allowed myself to feel toward my parents. "I'll go, but I've been paying Hannah's rent for the past 2 years because you couldn't be bothered to help her. Not anymore. That's on you now." The room fell silent. My revelation hung in the air, greeted with shocked expressions. Hannah's face went pale. My father's eyes widened in confusion, then narrowed in something like rage. But it was my mother who rushed forward, her expression suddenly shifting from contempt to desperation. "Wait, Jeffrey," she began, reaching out as if to physically stop me from leaving. "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "I'm done." And with that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glimpsed them through the front window, huddled together in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Hannah stood slightly apart, her arms wrapped around herself. I drove home in a strange state of numbness, the finality of what had just happened washing over me in waves. I had just cut ties with my family, or perhaps more accurately, acknowledged that they had already cut ties with me long ago. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about Grandpa, about the conversations we'd had on his porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk, about how he'd told me once that family wasn't just about blood, but about who shows up, who listens, who cares enough to be present. The days after that night were intense. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Hannah had called me multiple times, left me several voicemails, and sent texts, all of them full of anger and confusion. I didn't pick up right away. I needed space. I wasn't sure what to think, but a part of me knew what I had done was necessary. Eventually, I listened to one of her voicemails. Hannah's voice came through strained and accusatory, explaining that our parents were freaking out and blaming her for everything after learning I'd cut her off financially. She demanded I call her back immediately. I sighed, tossing my phone aside. They were blaming Hannah now, too? It made sense in some way. After all, she was the one left in the middle of all this. But I didn't want to get dragged back into their drama. Still, part of me felt guilty. Hannah wasn't like the rest of them, at least I thought she wasn't. My mother's voicemail was equally revealing. She berated me for throwing Hannah under the bus, claiming they had no idea I was paying Hannah's rent. According to her, Hannah had told them she was managing on her own. This discrepancy raised immediate red flags. If Hannah had been lying to our parents about the financial arrangement, what else had she been hiding? About an hour later, she showed up at my apartment without warning. She didn't knock, just barged right in using the spare key I'd given her. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed as she launched into accusations about my disappearance and the family chaos I'd supposedly created. When she explained that our father was telling everyone I'd thrown a tantrum at the party and that family members were now angry with her for being the reason I stopped the rent payments, I was genuinely surprised. This was a narrative twist I hadn't anticipated. Her defensiveness when I questioned why she hadn't spoken up before only deepened my suspicions. As our confrontation escalated, I called her out on what I was beginning to see clearly. She had been playing both sides all along, manipulating me just as our parents had. The truth emerged in pieces as her defenses crumbled. After Grandpa died, Hannah had initially defended me against our parents' accusations, but that support had wavered when they suggested she was only taking my side for financial gain. When she couldn't find a job that paid enough for rent and came to me for help, she deliberately hid that arrangement from them. The betrayal went deeper. 6 months ago, when our mother directly asked if I was helping her financially, Hannah had lied, claiming I had offered but she had refused. Her deception was discovered when our parents found her bank statements while helping with her taxes. They saw the monthly deposits from my account. The worst revelation came when I pressed her about their reaction. Rather than admitting she had lied about needing rent money, Hannah had told our parents she had no idea why I was sending her money. This enabled our father to develop his own theory, that I was paying her for information about the family, essentially, that she was my spy. I was stunned by this ultimate betrayal. My own sister had allowed our parents to believe I was engaged in some nefarious scheme rather than admit she had needed financial help. Her justification that she thought it would be easier, that she would look innocent, and that since I already had money, it wouldn't matter to me what they thought, only deepened the wound. When I confronted her with the full extent of her manipulation, letting our parents believe their worst suspicions about me because it was easier than telling the truth, Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She claimed she hadn't meant to hurt me, that she was just trying to keep everyone happy. I saw her act for the first time. She hadn't been trying to keep everyone happy. She had been trying to keep herself in everyone's good graces, wanting my financial support without our parents' judgment, wanting to be both the good daughter and the loyal sister without standing up for what was right. As the reality of my cutting off financial support sank in, Hannah's panic became evident. When she asked what she was supposed to do about rent, I reminded her that she was an adult who needed to figure it out just as I had figured out how to deal with family ostracism. She had options: getting a roommate, finding a better-paying job, moving to a cheaper apartment, and now those were her choices to make. Her final attempt at reconciliation came as she was leaving. She claimed she had never believed what our parents said about me manipulating Grandpa. My response was pointed. If she had truly believed in my innocence, she should have said so loudly and repeatedly. Her silence had made her complicit. After closing the door behind her, I felt the emptiness of my apartment more profoundly than before. I had lost my sister today, or rather, I had discovered that the sister I thought I had never really existed. In the days that followed, I let all calls and texts from my family go unanswered. I needed space to rebuild, to redefine who I was outside of their expectations and manipulations. I heard from some relatives who had started to see through my parents' lies. My cousin called me up one evening. "Hey, Jeffrey," she said cautiously. "I heard about everything that happened. I just want you to know you're not alone in this." That surprised me. Really, I thought everyone was turning on me. "Well, not everyone," my cousin said. "Uncle has been talking to a few of us. We're not buying your parents' story anymore. They've treated you like crap for too long." This was unexpected. For once, some of the family was actually on my side. It felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done. The emotional toll of everything that happened started to wear on me. I realized I had been giving so much of myself to my family for years, only to be taken advantage of. But now, I have to focus on myself. I couldn't keep trying to fix people who didn't want to change. Hannah's betrayal hurt, but it also gave me the clarity I needed. She wasn't the innocent sister I thought she was. She had been manipulating me just like our parents, and it hurt more than I expected. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you create for yourself after you walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with the people who should have supported you the most. Grandpa had known this, I realized. Maybe that's why he'd left me the inheritance in the first place, not just as a financial gift, but as a catalyst for truth, forcing everyone to reveal who they really were. In his own way, he had given me the chance to see my family clearly, without illusions. It was a painful gift, but perhaps the most valuable one I'd ever received. The conflict was resolved in an open-ended way. I cut ties with both my parents and Hannah. I told myself I wouldn't let their toxicity rule my life anymore. It was painful, but it was necessary. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to their approval. Looking back, I learned the hard way that not everyone in your life has your best interests at heart. Family can be toxic, and sometimes walking away is the only way to protect your own peace. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. It was time to start living for myself.